What is up, everybody? It is Shawnee Boy, the Sports Guru here, and I am here in our new house, and I am going to tell you a story. Of course, it's a sports story. Um, I'm going to tell you the story of my take on the 2016 Chicago Cubs World Championship. Now, it all started at the beginning of 2016. I was 15 years old at the time, and my aunt was so invested. She's so invested in the Cubs. She's a diehard Cubs fan. She's from Illinois, and the Rays were having a little bit of a down year that year. So I figured, hey, let's go see. Let's see if the Cubs can win the World Championship. I mean, they had what was called the curse of the Billy Goat. Now there are a lot of there are a lot of baseball quote unquote curses. Um, I was 3 when the Red Sox had that 86-year championship drought. It was called the Bambino. That lasted 86 years. And then the Chicago White Sox um, had what was called the Curse of Shoeless Joe Jackson. And that lasted 88 years. And I was 4 at the time. The Red Sox one was 1918 to 2004. And the White Sox one was 1917 to 2005. The Chicago Cubs going into that year had a 108-year curse known what was called the curse of the Billy Goat. And since 1908, that was 1908 was the last time they won it. And for all those years, like they'd get to the World Series and lose, they not make the playoffs. They get so far and they get to the playoffs and lose in the NLCS. They had a few close calls, but just couldn't quite get it done. So anyway, I was so invested in the Cubs that year to hopefully finally break the break the curse. Like finally win a world title for all the fans who've been so invested all their lives and never got to see them win a world championship. Same thing with my aunt. She lives in Illinois. Her family is diehard Cubs fans, and they've suffered all them years too. In fact, a lot of diehard Cubs fans, just like Red Sox and White Sox fans, waited a long time. Some never even got to see it because they, you know, died before they could get to see him win a world championship. And and then the year the Cubs were just on. I mean, you had Kyle Schwarber, Anthony Rizzo, Chris Bryant, Jason Hayward, David Ross behind the plate. You had Addison Russell. You had Dexter Fowler. You had Joe Madden as manager. It was a star-studded group, and they went on a tear. 103 and 58, best in the major leagues. They they were fully studded. Like they didn't have to worry about anything. Like they had a full studded lineup. They went on to win the division. They get to the playoffs. Um, they play the Giants in the division series, beat them. They play the Dodgers in the NLCS, and they didn't make the World Series since 1945. They didn't make the World Series since 45, and they full out get there when they beat the Dodgers in the NLCS. So finally, they're in the World Series. Everyone's like, "Oh my gosh, we're in the World Series for the first time in 71 years." And then they meet, lo and behold, the Cleveland Indians. They meet the Indians. Well, they're the Guardians now, but they're the Indians. Um, in the World Series. So they get to Cleveland because back then whoever won the All Star game won home field advantage in the World Series. Whichever league champion it was, American or National. That year the American League won, so the Indians had home field advantage. So Cleveland also has a curse. The Cubs had the longest drought. The Indians had the second longest drought. They have the curse of what's called Rocky Colavito. They curses. And the Cubs were close so many times. 1969, they lose to the Mets. 1984, they lose to the Padres. 1989, they lose to the Giants and all of them in the NLCS. Then in 2003, they were 5 outs away from the World Series, NLCS Game 6. They had a 3-1 lead over the Marlins. They lose Game 5. Game 6, they're 5 outs away from getting there. A foul ball that was really catchable in the top of the eighth. A fan by the name of Steve Bartman. He's wearing a Cubs hat. He's wearing glasses, headphones, green sweater. Reaches out, and Moises Alou, with the Cubs at the time, he used to be with the Marlins. He reaches up to try to get it, and then Bartman reaches out and bumbles the ball, and everyone around him was like, "Why would you do that? Why would you do that?" Like, with the whole curse. So then, what happens? The Marlins go on an 8-run barrage in the eighth inning. That, of course, the Cubs ended up losing. They go to Game 7 the next night, and the Marlins end up winning Game 7. And then everyone in Wrigleyville was absolutely pissed. They shunned him. They threatened him. They gave him death threats. He had to go into hiding for 13 years. I feel so bad for the guy. Then what happened was they, get to the playoffs, they lose, or they not even make the playoffs. And everyone was blaming it on Steve Bartman. He got a bunch of deals, like to go on commercials and stuff like that, 6-figure deals to do this and do that. Of course, he said no. He just wanted a peaceful life. Can't really blame the guy. I felt so bad for him. He had to put up that in the city of Chicago, a bunch of crazy Cub fans for all them years. But finally, 2016, they're finally in the World Series against Cleveland. The first game, um, Roberto Perez game, as I like to call it, because he had a dominant game for Cleveland. The Indians won 6-0. The next game, in Game 2, the Cubs come out like gangbusters and full out win the game 5-1. Game 3, well, the first 2 games were in Cleveland. The next 3 are in Chicago at Wrigley. So then, Game 3, it ended up being a real tight one, but the Indians managed to get it 1-1 across to win the game 1-0. Game 4, the Indians just stormed out and blew the Cubs away 7-1. So they're up 3-1, one went away from the first title since 1948. The first thing I thought was, oh no, the Cubs fans have waited all them years, and now they're gonna lose lose it after all this time at Wrigley. So it was a real close game. The Indians struck first, then the Cubs came back. It was like punch after punch after punch. And then finally, the Cubs ended up winning 3-2 to force the series back to Cleveland. Game 6. Cubs just mashed the Indians. It was an absolute barrage. They just came out flying. They stormed in this game, and they win 9-3. And then we're all like, yes, we're going to Game Seven. This game and Game Seven are the two best words in sports because no matter what happens in that game, the winner's going to take the championship. The winner's going to take that series, and everyone knows like anything can happen in that game. So, you know, and me and my dad both talked and said we're gonna go to my grandmother's house to watch the game. We have to watch the game. So we go to my grandmother's house to watch the game, and that was when Dexter Fowler leads it off with a home run, and we're like, "Oh yeah, this is awesome. This is the way we should start the game. Big start." And then they tackle on some more runs. Big hits, big hits. Then it was 3-1 in the fourth. Then David Ross, the catcher playing in his final game of his career, hits one out. That makes it 5-1. Then the Indians get a big hit. They with two runners on. It's 5-3. Then there was another home run hit by someone, which I forgot the name, but it's 6-3. So we're heading into the eighth inning. We're heading into the eighth inning, and I'm like, you know what, Dad? I'm getting a little tired, but I want to stay up. And then he's like, you know what, Sean? Go ahead, snooze. When something big happens, I'll wake you up, or when the Cubs are close to winning, I'll wake you up. I snooze. And then all of a sudden, I wake up and I hear the crowd cheering in Cleveland. And then Dad wakes me up and says, they got to run 6-4. And then Rajay Davis for Cleveland bashes one down the left field line for a 2-run bomb, and that ties it. The game is tied. I'm like, no. No, 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 no. I was thinking of my aunt. I was thinking about all the Cubs fans that waited all the years to get here and to win it. We were down 3-1, and all of a sudden this happens. So we go to the ninth. Neither team scores. Then there was a 15-minute rain delay. Many people are wondering, like, did that reset the game? Did that take away all the momentum on the Indians and reset it and reset the game to, whoever could get momentum back, you know, maybe this, maybe that. So anyway, we go to the 10th, extra innings. Cubs get 2 runners on. Up comes Ben Zobrist, former Ray. He comes up and hits one to left field, and that scores Chris Bryant, and then Anthony Rizzo with his hands up over his head, like, oh my God, this just happened. And then they get another run. It's 8-6. They go to the bottom of the 10th. Last chance for the Indians. They get 2 quick outs. The Cubs do. Everyone's like, oh man, one more out. Then the Indians get a hit. Runner on first. Then the Indians get a big hit, and it was a single, but the runner came all the way around. I think it was Brendan Geyer, made it 8-7. And then you know, Martin something something Martinez comes up. This no name guy comes up, like not a big name. He hits a little dribbler to Chris Bryant at third, and then when he threw the ball, he slipped. Like he actually fell down right after he threw the ball, but it was just enough to get to Anthony Rizzo to get the out, and the Cubs are world champs for the first time in 108 years. When you see a fan base suffer like that for all them years, you want it to be over. You want it to end. You want the suffering to be put behind you. The curse of the Billy Goat was finally lifted. All of Chicago went crazy. All the fans that went to Cleveland from Chicago that were there went absolutely ballistic. I was thinking of my aunt the whole time. I'm like, finally, she can rest easy now. She can um, be happy. I mean, I talk to her still often. Um, I remember watching that game. I was like, oh my god, that was probably one of the best baseball games I ever watched. Probably the best series I ever watched in baseball. Um, and I'm glad to say I was alive to see it, to experience it. I texted her the next day. I texted her the next day, and she was like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe it, Sean! They did it." I texted her the night before, the day before the game. She said she was on pins and needles. I'm like, what about Game 5 when they were so close to going home? She's like, oh yeah, I was on pins and needles then, but I'm really on pins and needles now because it's Game 7. So you know, and that's my take on the Cubs ending the 108-year curse of the Billy Goat. The Indians, or the Guardians now, still have that curse called the Curse of Rocky Colavito. It still goes on to this day. They haven't won the title since '48. I keep thinking, Theo Epstein, GM for the Red Sox for those two world championships in '04 and '07, um, really, really, he's the one that broke the curse of the Bambino with the Red Sox and in that '86 year drought because he was the GM for them in that year. He was the GM for the Cubs in '16. I'm like, Cleveland, why don't you give this guy a shot? Maybe he'll end your curse too. So, anyway, that is my take on it. I hope you like this. Like and subscribe to Shawnee Boy the Sports Guru, and I'll see you next time.